Good morning, everybody. It is so good to see you all. If you are joining us here, if you are joining us online, or however you are experiencing this, it is wonderful to experience this together. I have been looking forward to this sermon for quite some time. This is one of my favorite texts, and when Jackie put me on the schedule, I was like, I am going to have fun with this one. So we're going to tell a few stories, 3 stories from the Bible, and then 3 stories from the world around us. And then we'll connect them all together, and along the way, we will discover God in places we may not have always known to look. But first, I need to show us a video.
How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Go!
Wonderful. Now we're ready to go. The text that Brianna read was the second half of a text that you've likely heard before, the book of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word was with God in the beginning. Through this Word, this divine spark, all things were made. Without this Word, nothing was made that has been made, because in this Word was life, and that life was the light of all people. As Jackie said earlier, this is the light that shines in the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it. And then as Brianna continued, this Word, this divine light, it was in the world. And though the world was made through it, the world did not recognize it. God was in the world, and though the world was made through God, the world doesn't always recognize God. And then the Word became flesh and made its dwelling among us. Now, for all of you who spent all of your free time reading theology books and things about Greek and Hebrew, you're already thinking, ooh, this is the good part. Okay? That word, dwell among us. You're going to read it in English, which is a translation from Greek, which is actually a throwback to Hebrew, because there's a story in the book of Exodus about people wandering around in the desert, living in tents, and so they make this space for God, a sacred space. But this sacred space for God is a tent. Because this sacred space for God, this tent, it doesn't live on the edge of town, it's right in the center. They called it a tabernacle. The Word became flesh, and the Word technically would be, and tabernacled among us. Came right to the center, right where we are. Because God is in the world, and though the world was made through God, the world doesn't always recognize God. This is where we get the word incarnation. To incarnate means to put flesh on. God is not content to sit far away, but God says, I want to put me some skin on, and I'm going to come down and walk around. God is in the world, and though the world is made through God, we don't always recognize God. Second story. There were some shepherds keeping watch over their flocks by night. This is a throwback to like a week ago, in case you were wondering. Christmas. The shepherds saw this angel that appeared to them. The angel said the lines that I've memorized many times for Christmas pageants growing up. Fear not, for I bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. For today, in the city of David, is born a Savior. These shepherds, they're a little freaked out. Angel just comes and starts talking to them like this. What is going on? The angel comforts the shepherds. Other angels join. They sing the Hallelujah chorus. And then the shepherds go on their way to find this baby. But they were given one other piece of advice. The angel says to the shepherds, and this is how you will recognize him. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. And this is how you will recognize him. Sometimes we need someone to point out where God is, because it seems like God's hiding, but really, God is right there before us. And this is how you'll recognize him. Third story. There were two friends walking home, a long walk from a city called Jerusalem to their home in Emmaus. This is a long walk along the Emmaus road. These two friends, they're a little downtrodden, a little depressed. They had their hopes up. There was this individual that they thought was going to be the one to change everything, but then that person got killed. So these two people, it's about 3 days since that whole thing happened. Hint, hint, Easter. It's about 3 days since that whole thing went down. They're walking home this long Emmaus road, and they're heading towards their hometown when they're joined by a stranger. These two friends and a stranger. And the stranger starts talking to them, asking them, where are you going? What have you been up to? Why do you look so sad? And they tell him, we had this one we thought was going to be the hope for the world, and they killed him. This stranger, hint, hint, Jesus, this stranger starts telling them all about the Hebrew scriptures, about the words of the prophets, and all that God's anointed one, the Word, in the beginning was the Word, what the Word was sent to do, and how this Word, this divine spark, can never be put out. And so these two friends and this stranger, they get to Emmaus, and the stranger puts on the whole like, oh, I got to keep going farther, which I'm pretty sure was just him, fishing for the invitation to come over for dinner, which is what happens next. Hey, come on over for dinner before you have to go wherever you're going. So these two friends and the stranger come over for dinner, and it's when they're sharing this meal, and it's when the stranger breaks the bread. The text tells us, and they recognized him. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. This is how you'll recognize him. And they recognized him. All these stories could be summed up with a single word: Emmanuel. Let me hear you say Emmanuel. Hebrew 101, here we go. Okay, this is actually two Hebrew words put together. Emmanuel is a prefix which means with us, and El is the Hebrew word that means God. Let's say it again, Emmanuel. So Emmanuel, when you put it together, it means God with us. God was in the world. This is how you will recognize God. And they recognized the stranger they had had a road trip with. There was something sacred about this stranger. Because when you know how to open your eyes, you can suddenly see the divine in the daily. God is with us. Now, another word, if we wanted to mix it up instead of Emmanuel, the word could be Epiphany, which Jackie mentioned earlier. Today is the beginning of the season of Epiphany, this season of light, this season that brings us back not just to inventors having epiphanies, like ideas, but Epiphany meaning this season when we remember the Magi, these kings who traversed afar, field and fountain, moor and mountain, following yonder star. These Magi who somehow knew how to see something that others couldn't see. Whether it was a star in the sky or a star in the manger, they had eyes to see. They had, I would call them epiphany eyes, to see he was in the world. And though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. They had epiphany eyes. This is how you'll recognize him. They had epiphany eyes to know that it wasn't just a stranger, but something a little more sacred was going on right here. You see, Jesus is a moonwalking bear. He was in the world. This is how you'll recognize him. And they recognized him. How many of you, let's be honest, when you watched the video, the first time it went across, you were just busy counting passes? Yeah. But then once they said, "But did you see the moonwalking bear?" Suddenly, your eyes were looking for something a little bit different. I don't know about you, but sometimes I am so busy counting the passes that I forget to open my eyes and realize he was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. This is how you'll recognize him, and they recognized him. Let me tell you 3 stories that will help us open our epiphany eyes. The first one, I need to put this little Christmas bow on a specific part of the world. There it is, the Rockaways. I found it. A couple weeks ago, I joined a group from Middle. As we went out to the Rockaways, we filled 2 vans full of people and gifts, and we headed out to help celebrate Christmas with families who are still continuing to recover and rebuild from Hurricane Sandy over a year ago. And we went there, we dropped off some gifts, we went and volunteered at this Christmas extravaganza that was happening, and then the 2 vans, some people in each of the vans, went out, and we had loaded up them with specific gifts for specific families. And so we'd go around, we'd get to a corner, we'd call a family, see if they're home, say, hey, we're here from the Secret Sandy Claus. It's a very clever name. Secret Sandy Claus Gift Extravaganza. There was an official title that I'm butchering right now. We'd love to bring you some gifts. They knew we were coming, but the kids didn't always know we were coming. So we get out of the van. I'm wearing an elf hat, carrying a ukulele, and we had, which is just what I do. And we had a person in a giant snow person costume, and then we had a Mrs. Claus. The snow person was filling in for Santa, I guess. And we would go to the houses with a bag full of gifts, ring the doorbell, sing them a ukulele version of Jingle Bells, and give them these gifts for these children and these families. Now, even though the parents knew we were coming, so they had eyes to see us pull around the corner. The children, when they see a giant walking snow person, they know something's coming. Now, I would have thought going into this trip, driving one of the vans, being one of the pastors who's leading this thing, that, okay, we are coming here to bring them this bit of life, this bit of light. We are coming to them to say, hey, we want you to know that God is with you, which we did. But I did not expect to have it returned so much, because it was seeing their eyes light up, hearing these parents talk about the ongoing stories that they are every day working for, and the ways that they know God is with them, reminded me, oh, we've got some church going on in this front lawn. These people are showing me that God is in the world. The world was made through God, and sometimes I need some help to recognize that. My second story is about a way I have help recognizing that. Now, like I said earlier, sometimes I'm busy counting passes in life to miss the moonwalking bear. Sometimes I get so focused on all the projects and ideas and filling pages in my notebook and building new websites and watching the latest episode of Digimon and whatever I might be doing that I get a little busy. So a few years ago, my wife and I got matching tattoos. We have a handful of tattoos. This is our only matching tattoo. So we got it for a lot of reasons. But one of them, it's right here on our wrists. It's a prayer labyrinth, a 7-circuit. I put this here, and not just so that my nieces and nephews could follow their Uncle Jim's arm maze, which they do, but I got it for myself to remind me of the need to smile, to breathe, and to go slowly. Now, the smiling I do pretty naturally. The breathing I do, pretty automatically. But the going slowly, I'm just so busy. So busy being busy, trying to keep up with how busy I am, that I need to realize each moment is not ahead of me, but each moment is right here. And God is in this moment. This is like my own little angel. And this is how you will recognize him. Now, the third story. We will experience this one this morning. Jesus took bread and broke it, and these strangers recognized that this was God with them. when we taste the bitterness of this cup and the sweetness of this bread, may it open our epiphany eyes to realize that God is with us. Now, there's whole books written on communion, on the Eucharist, on the Last Supper, on what it is. Is it a sacrament? Is it an ordinance? If you're interested in that, we'll talk later. But I like to think of this sacred meal as a meal of mindfulness. It's a meal where I put these elements, these earthy, ordinary bread and juice into my mouth, and I realize that this is the bread of life and the cup of blessing. Because as I eat it mindfully, I am reminded that God is in every taste. You can find the sacred in a stranger. You can find the divine in the daily. Sometimes you just need to open your eyes. So where will you recognize God? Or how will you help someone else recognize God? You see, the Word became flesh, and the Word has never stopped becoming flesh. I like to think of it this way. In our ever-changing world, the Word becomes fresh, and we bring it to life, these acts of love and justice, of grace and peace in a broken and fractured world. We live in a world where people are just counting passes. But friends, may we be people who help everyone around us, including ourselves, see that Jesus is a moonwalking bear. Amen.